Welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guest today is Carol Ross Barney, FAIA, Founder and Design Principal at Ross Barney Architects, a Chicago-based architecture, urban design, and landscape architecture studio. Carol Ross Barney, FAIA, HASLA, and 2023 American Institute of Architects Gold Medal recipient, is an architect, urbanist, mentor, and educator, and has relentlessly advocated that excellent design is a right, not a privilege. Dedicated to design of public buildings and spaces, her exploration into the power of how the built environment can improve our daily lives has produced distinctive structures and places that have become cultural icons. The projects we will be talking about today are the Chicago Riverwalk and DuSable Park, both in Chicago. For over 15 years, Ross Barney Architects has helped guide the transformation of the Chicago Riverwalk, a journey that turned a neglected industrial edge into one of the city's most beloved public spaces. Once a forgotten stretch of dock and concrete, the Riverwalk now invites people to stroll, gather, and experience a city from a new perspective. By implementing a multi-block design, what once was a string of isolated spaces became a continuous path, a civic corridor full of life. Now let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. My guest today, I'm very honored to have Carol Ross Barney, FAIA, Founder and Design Principal at Ross Barney Architects, a Chicago-based architecture, urban design, and landscape architecture studio. The projects we are talking about today are the Chicago Riverwalk and the DuSable Park, also in Chicago. Carol, welcome to Detailed. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you. Glad to be here.
I am honored to have you here today. We'll get right into it. I always start every episode with what I call my icebreaker question, and they're all over the place. So for you today, as I mentioned to you before we got started, I did a little homework on you on the internet before this interview today, just to have an idea of who you are. On the Art Institute of Chicago webpage, there is a 58-page oral history of Carol Ross Barney document, highlighting your career, projects, and achievements as part of their Chicago Architects Oral History Project. As I was flipping through it, there was a statement that jumped off the page, just jumped right off the page at me, that aligns with my final question of every episode of this podcast. You comment, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, quote, "You have to leave the world a better place. It's an obligation," close quotes. I couldn't agree with you more. So tell me, what drives that mission in you?
You know, I've talked a lot about this lately because people have been asking me, well, why did you become an architect? What's this about? And I I think it's a basic human feeling that you have to have a purpose. And the other thing that is sort of inherent in our makeup, I think, is fellowship. I mean, you could talk about people who aren't good fellows, I guess, also. But I remember, and I've told this story before. I remember I was really impressed when I was a child, like in eighth grade, junior high, um, by the changes that were happening. That was probably about 1960, right around there, and I was just super inspired by by the things that were happening. I was really inspired by Kennedy. I was really inspired by the idea that we can change our world because that was the message of the times. And that message was also reinforced by my parents, definitely. Being these post-war parents. I am a boomer, and I think I grew up in a really brave time. So that's my background. But I sincerely believe that um, that is the most important thing for people in lives. If you don't leave it better, I mean, what's the whole point of it? And so I became an architect because I thought it was possibly a way to do that. Um, it's been my childhood, besides being in the States, my dad was a management consultant. So we lived in Europe post-war, and we lived in Dusseldorf, which was a destroyed city. And looking back, I think just being there then gave me this need to rebuild. And so when I was casting around in my eighth grade mind for something to do, I thought, well, why not architecture? It never crossed my mind that there weren't any women in architecture, but that's another story. But in any case, I still believe that. Um, that's why I go to work. That's what I do. What I do.
I love that. And I think that a lot of people feel like, well, I'm just one person. I can't change the world. But I think even little things we do have far reaching, I call them ripples that ripple
Yeah.
out to places that we never see down the road.
And the truth of the matter is, everybody's just one person, and so nobody does it alone. And um, how it all fits together, um, you may have more trouble controlling that, but everybody is just one person on the whole planet. So you do your part, and there is a ripple.
That's why I teach. So I knew that this was going to be a great conversation. So
So
let's
you're a
talk
teacher?
about. I teach project delivery education.
Oh, where?
I teach for CSI, the Construction
Oh,
Specifications
sure.
Institute.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
teach my class online. So I think my biggest class so far, I teach twice a year, 12 weeks, was 108 students, but I have
That's a lot.
students. Yeah, it is. I have students in our industry from all over the country.
Wow. Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
I've been doing that for about 13
You
years.
know, I've been teaching for 30 some years at IIT of the Illinois Institute of Technology. And I had to teach 2 semesters online, and I thought it was really hard. So I'm not quite sure how you do it. It was really, really hard. Maybe I teach at a design studio, so that may be why it's hard. I don't know, uh,
I
but
could see
kudos.
that being more challenging.
Yeah, it was over COVID. It was tough. Although those classes I remember vividly because I met those students in different ways.
Well, I used to teach in person and I went fully online also during COVID. And I've stayed that way largely because I can reach more people this way.
Hmm.
I'm pretty limited to people in my area who want to get that education if I teach in person. But online, I have even people outside of the country sometimes take my class. And I feel like I'm making more of a difference if I teach online because I can get to
Yeah.
more people.
So project delivery, for example, what do you cover?
Well, basically, all of the contractual responsibilities on a project from the time you conceive the project to the time you tear the building down. So, appropriate construction administration procedures and what you can and can't do in your contract documents and roles and responsibilities. And there's a whole host of things, but it's basically all the things you have to do for a project outside of designing it.
Uh-huh.
And it's an education, architects or design professionals in general, because any discipline needs this education that they don't get in school.
Yeah,
And if they get it in school, it's this little tiny glimmer of what we actually have to do all day, every day in a firm.
very true.
And there's very few people, there's outside of CSI that actually does the whole cradle to grave. There isn't anybody else who teaches it.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
And so, yeah, so that's one of my many missions in life is to get us all on the same page. Anyway, we're not talking about me today. We're talking about you. It's like, wait, she's interviewing me. So most of my interviews are typically on this podcast are with architects about buildings, but not always. Um, I'm excited to talk about these two projects today that are a little outside of my normal range. So let's start with give me a brief history of the Chicago Riverwalk.
Oh, wow. Um, you're right. These projects are not typical architect projects. Um, by the way, though, my studio, I think when we started the Riverwalk, we didn't have a landscape studio, but we do now, and it's just been sort of a natural growth of our practice and what we need to know about, what we have to be able to provide for our projects. But my practice is largely concentrated on public work. And for a lot of that is infrastructure. So, for example, we've been doing rail projects for the Chicago Transit Authority, probably for 40 years now. And we have done things that people don't even think about as architecture. They're sort of in the corners and the cracks of um, of cities and environments. For example, we did a, a 10-story chiller plant at Ohio State University. Um, but when you think about it, this is a glue that holds the city together, and infrastructure, and those types of things really deserve design. And it's kind of crazy because often you'll hear, "Well, it's just a roadway or it's just infrastructure. It doesn't need design." I don't give me any design. Like it's something that you pour on a project at the end. And actually, I think that design thinking is the most critical ingredient for those projects. And architects are the people who are most prepared to provide that because we're generalists. An engineer, by definition, is someone who knows everything about one thing. And architects, we almost are the opposite. We know something about everything. And it's that type of overview, I think that's essential to successful infrastructure projects. So we've been doing that for a long time. And the Riverwalk was sort of a project that grew out of that practice. Actually, it started as a series of small projects that we were doing for CDOT, the Chicago Department of Transportation. And, it was about the year 2000, and we had, a series of small projects, everything from redesigning railings to, just small stuff. Um, and one of the things that they gave us in that project is, a master plan for the property that was owned by the city of Chicago along the river. And the reason that they were interested in is, if you've been in Chicago, you might know this, two-story roadway that goes along the river, in the city. It's called Wacker Drive. It's kind of clever because underneath are deliveries and, utilities, and then on the upper level is the civic level. And it was actually proposed, by Daniel Burnham in his, Plan of Chicago in 1909, and it was one of the things that was constructed out of the plan. Um, After it had been in service for 70, 80 years, uh, the city needed to do heavy duty maintenance, and so they made a TIF district. And in the TIF district, there's a little money left over in the TIF fees. And they said, "Well, we'd really like to plan the river walk next to Dwacker Drive." And they asked us to do it. So that was the beginning of it. Um, so in that first project, which we now call phase one, we did the master plan for the Riverwalk, and there was enough money left over. It was a multi-million-dollar project to renovate Wacker Drive. So that's where most of the money went. But there was enough money left that we did, the first phase of the Riverwalk, which was the reconstruction of, basically the intersection of Wabash and Michigan, if you're Chicagoan, which was pretty complicated, but it created such wonderful space that, the city decided to proceed. It was interesting because the first phase we did under, Richard M. Daley the son, was the mayor of Chicago then. He was a great client, super advocate for the river. Um, but he decided not to run again, and, we got a new mayor, Rahm Emanuel, and, working for Rahm was amazing. First of all, it was a terrible time. It was like 2007, if you remember that bubble,
Mm.
economic bubble. So, all the cities in the world or all the cities in the US were applying for federal grant money to do shovel-ready projects, both for the reason of keeping the city going, basically, with construction. And, Ram was fabulous. He loved the river. He was also very good at planning, um, and he understood Washington. He was just returning from Congress then. It was just before he became Obama's chief of staff. Anyway, um, working for Ram was just oh, no, wait, it was after Obama. He was after Obama. Anyway, working for him was great. He found, money to, build the Riverwalk, and so it was, full speed ahead on the remaining parts of the Riverwalk. We did in the end, we did, 9 blocks. It's about a mile and a half, it's on the south side of the river right downtown. The thing that's amazing about the project is this is property that is in the middle of one of the major cities in the whole world. I mean, this Chicago is a world-class city, and it was completely neglected. I think a lot of people didn't even know it existed. And, right now, Chicagoans are so proud of the Riverwalk. If you come to Chicago, if you visit a friend in Chicago, one of the things they'll tell you is, "Let's go down to the Riverwalk." And it's great for me. I am a native. I was born in Chicago. My practice is in Chicago. It's great for me because it's really it's introduced a whole new way of seeing the city for the people who live there, and it's an important way. It's a way that makes them love their city, and it's an important addition to the quality of their life. So getting back to where we started, I think it's a chance to make those improvements to human life. Anyway, that's how the Riverwalk started. Actually, in the end, we did it in 2 separate design contracts and 3 separate construction contracts. And, we had lots of partners. I can't stress that more. Um, for our first phases, we worked with Collins Engineer as a prime, contract holder. In each contract, we were the designer. And in the second phase, we worked with Sasaki Associates. They were the prime contract holder. And, the final phase was completed in 2016. So I worked on this project for 16 years of my life. Um, but it's pretty amazing. So it's coming on 10 years now, and it's really great to go down and look at it because if anything, its vitality has grown and improved.
What a lovely addition to the city. I mean, when they take spaces like that and turn it into a place that people come together.
And the other 2 things that are really good about the Riverwalk is it's free. I mean, a lot of places in cities today I was in Barcelona not long ago, and you have to pay to get into Park Güell now. It's like, I see why. I mean, I understand this, but it seems like, uh, there's this the Riverwalk, it's joyously free. It's for everybody. Um, and, the second thing is it's inspired other projects on the river, and actually, the Chicago River goes through a lot of neighborhoods in Chicago, so in neighborhoods, in the city, because once, you understand what could happen, it's a lot easier to make projects happen. So, the Riverwalk has changed not just downtown, but it's changing the whole city.
So can you so to date there have been 3 phases of your work here. Can you just broadly outline for me kind of the scope of the work that was involved in each
Oh, sure.
phase?
Yeah, the whole Riverwalk, the whole, you know, all in, was probably close to $200 million worth of construction. But when you look at the, the resultant investment in the city, it was like a drop in the bucket. It was like a super, good investment for the city. The first phase, like I said, was paid for out of the, Wacker Drive TIF funds. But, just looking at what it was sort of the heart of the Riverwalk, the part that the city owns. The city owns the whole south side of, the river downtown. The rest of the riverbank, by the way, is privately owned. So right now, Chicago is trying to, it's in the plan to build additional Riverwalk, connecting Riverwalk. In fact, I hope someday you'll be able to walk the entire Chicago River. There's 150 miles of it, or bike it, or whatever, because the city has an ordinance that if you own river property, you have to maintain a right-of-way of 30 feet. And so eventually, hopefully, we'll be connected throughout the whole city. But phase one was a renovation of essentially 3 blocks that starts at Michigan Avenue and ends at State. And there was a lot of work in phase one because in rebuilding Wacker Drive, there was a major change uh, of traffic, and that gave us a place to make a park that's called it's Chicago's Vietnam Memorial, and that's in that first phase. It's called Wabash Plaza. Um, it's interesting because one of the things that was a major challenge, and this was actually our first phase, the river. There was a lower level walkway along the river, but it wasn't connected because the city had built our very famous trunnion bascule bridges so that the bridge house interrupted the Riverwalk. And I could go ahead and explain trunnion bascule bridges, but I get really wonky, so you better not encourage me about that. But in
Okay.
any case, one of the problems was that the walk wasn't continuous, and it needed to be continuous if people were going to enjoy it. So our first problem was to figure out how to make a continuous walkway. We looked at a lot of different solutions. Um, it was complicated by the fact that um, if you change the shoreline of any navigable waterway in the United States, you have to apply to Congress. It's and it's governed by Congress. So that meant that if we wanted to add a walkway on the Riverwalk to get past the bridges, we would have to ask for an act of Congress. So this is truly one of those projects where you say, "Oh, that project was so hard." It's like we needed an act of Congress to get that. This one actually did. And, so the basic idea of the Riverwalk is we, added, 15 feet under the bridges, so where the bridges cross the Chicago River, and then we added 25 feet, uh, at where between the bridges. And that, added land allowed us to make a continuous Riverwalk. Before that was done, the Riverwalk was only about 15 feet wide, and so, it's still a very skinny park, but at least now we have a little bit more depth. Anyway, it took Congress, quite a bit of time to approve that, to say the least. And, so, the first phase was completed in 2005, but we didn't get the, rest of it done until 2009 because we were waiting for the, congressional approval. But it's a real simple technology in the end. We looked at a lot of things. We looked at doing floating construction. If we had done floating construction, um, we would not have needed the act of Congress because that's temporary construction. Um, but since the city, we looked at it, it wasn't very practical to make it float. So in the end, it's just sheet piling and backfill. So it's a very traditional way to build new land. But the other thing that's interesting is Chicago. Chicago's amazing. We have 34 miles of lakefront. But I wouldn't say that we are extraordinarily, well-versed or that marine construction happens really often in our city. So this was an unusual project, and a lot of it was built from the marine side, from the riverside. Anyway, so that set the tone. In fact, we built the pieces that really, are the sort of trademarks of the Riverwalk. The added, piece of a walkway and the underbridges, which you may have seen photos of. The underbridges, are done in a stainless steel. So when you're walking along the river, and when you walk under the bridges, the water and the sparkle of the water is also reflected over your head. So we did the first designs for the under bridges in phase one. And so 2009, if we're done, but there's this crisis in the US and Ram decides the river is one of the projects he's going to sponsor in his shovel ready package. And so, he succeeds, and he gets a TIFIA loan, which is for innovation in transportation. It's from the Department of Transportation. And, what it is it's an extremely low interest loan. Most of them have been used to, do things like highways in cities and stuff like that. But Ron managed to convince the Department of Transportation that the Riverwalk was actually transportation and that it was eligible for this money. So, when we got that loan, which is another interesting thing because the Riverwalk, I'm fascinated by how, and actually it's more than fascination. I think we have to find a better way to build our cities, to renew our cities. Because right now, I think that I'm not very in favor of regressive taxes or hidden taxes. Although I see why you do it. I mean, it's a lot easier to do this at Tiffy alone that you never see. And you say to the city of Chicago, oh, we didn't use any of your tax dollars. But I wonder about that. I think that we, the people, have to decide to make these improvements. Those are the best projects. They're the most beloved. The other ones are they feel like gifts, but they're not really gifts. But that's another topic entirely. Uh, in any case, um, that money let us start the work on this next phase. Uh, we went full speed ahead. Uh, the Riverwalk is actually the blocks are themed uh, to be river environments. So they are planted and designed to recall spaces that you'd find along an Illinois River, um, pretty much anywhere. So, for example, there was never a marina where you could harbor boats along the Chicago River or tie up. And so one of the blocks is called exactly that, the marina. We made another block. The existing walkway was about 5 feet above river level when we started the project. And we were really interested in bringing people closer to the water than 5 feet above. And we were successful at doing that. And in one block in particular, we get down to 6 inches. And we call that block the Cove. And one of the things that people have said about the Riverwalk is it's so nice to be really close to the water instead of being, really high. I can tell you why it was so high too. But anyway, um, we have the next block is a block that features a very large amphitheater type stair. And it goes from Wacker Drive, which is about 20 feet above the river, all the way to a foot above the river. And it acts as a people watching space. Although there have been public performances, some of them on barges where people sit um, on the bank and you look down, and that's called the River Theater. The other feature of the River Theater is there's an accessible ramp that cuts through the amphitheater, and that makes the park universally available to people with handicaps, which is really important. And then the last three blocks celebrate different aspects. One block has floating plants. In a typical Illinois river, you'll have plants that float in the water, like water lilies and stuff like that. And you'll have plants that grow at the riverbank. They're rooted, but they really live in the water. And then finally, um, rivers in Illinois and in most of the world really serve as rain and flood outlets. And so there are so the rest of the plants on this block are water, they're flood tolerant, they're inundant tolerant. And so even though it looks like a farm, it's really kind of a nice block because they're floating in these very regular rectangles. It recalls what would be there in a naturalized environment. The other thing we did in that block is underneath the plantings, we designed a fish hotel. The Friends of the Chicago River were one of the big advocates for the Riverwalk. And they had operated, I don't know if that's the right word, they had constructed a fish hotel that floated into the river. Um, one of the things over the development of the Chicago of the city is the river was channelized and there wasn't any habitat. And for a long time, the city returned the treated water without dechlorinating it. So there was very little wildlife in the Chicago River. But the Friends of the River wanted to restore that. So they started this little floating fish hotel. And we took what they learned from that to make one whole block, essentially a fish hotel. So beneath that particular block, which is called the jetty, um, we created habitat for fishes, and that also the food that they eat grows in the dangling roots of the water plants. So that was really sort of an exploration of river environments and how they work. We have another block that is an interactive water play feature. That's block over. And then our final block is at the confluence. Right now, it's a big picnic ground. And so those are the blocks. And like I said, it took 16 years. And the final phase was completed in 2016.
Did you know when you started it was gonna be 16 years of your life?
No,
Or did it
I
just
didn't know
kinda
that.
no?
But I have to say that one of the things about being an architect that's always impressed me, if we have projects that these are rare, somebody will come in and, like the project, that's been published frequently, we did the McDonald's Chicago flagship restaurant, and, McDonald's showed up at our office one day, and 14 months later, that building was ready. And so it's possible to do that, to build it and get it done, in a really short period of time. But we've worked on a lot of public projects that just seem to take forever. We did, the replacement for the Murrah Building in Oklahoma City, and, we were commissioned in '97, but we didn't finish that project until 2004. And, one of the reasons that one took so long is, they impeached Bill Clinton right in the middle of it, so Congress did nothing. That was ano We've had 2 projects that required separate congressional action, which is really rare. I don't know, I think I might be the only architect that has 2 projects. No, I'm sure I'm not. But, that one, happened because when the Congress decided to replace the Murrah Building, the space, they had to add money to GSA's budget, and so it was a separate appropriation. So that one took a long time too, but public projects can take a long time, really a long time. I
I
keep on
spent
think
most of my career on public projects,
okay, then you don't wanna
probably
talk about some.
yeah, no, I do. I am curious though, obviously, these projects are like public projects on steroids. I mean, this is the first time in my entire career I've heard of somebody having to get congressional approval. Um, what does when you have all these
Well,
and I have a good idea of this, but our listeners may not.
true.
When you have all these public and in the case of the Chicago Riverwalk, several layers of public agencies. You have the city of Chicago. You have whatever was going on with these federal loans. You've got getting congressional approval. I don't even know what that looks like. What does that how do you plan and get anything done? Because I know how slow public work moves, and you usually have these big committees of people, community and agencies and everything that all have their own ideas.
Yeah.
How do you get everybody on the same page and get it approved?
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to that. There's sort of the aspirational part, and then there's the really practical, get it, who does this work part. For the aspirational part, I'm a firm believer that projects get done by teams, not by individuals. And that's why I took the time to, introduce my partners when I started talking about the Riverwalk, because my studio didn't do this alone. I mean, it's nice that we get the credit more often than anyone else, and I think it's because we're the storytellers for the project. We're the keeper of the story, um, but that project had a cast of hundreds. We had 2 civil engineers, one on land side, one on marine side. We had, for example, a marine traffic consultant. We had a wildlife specialist. We had 2 landscape architects. Sasaki was the design landscape architect, and then we had a landscape architect of record, Jacobs Ryan. They were brilliant. The plantings on the Riverwalk are some of the most successful we've ever worked on, and that's all because of Terry Ryan. So anybody who thinks that, a project is really done by one person, yeah, hasn't been involved in what we do. So part of getting it done is making sure that everybody understands the mission, but beyond that, that they agree with the mission, that there's a consensus, because that gives you a dedication to get it done. And then the second thing is you have to, if you want to be successful at public work, that's part of it. I can tell you, oh, we can't do public work because we can't make money. You can make money. Or we can't do it because there's just too much paperwork. You can do that. You could do that. In fact, we had our project manager from Sasaki was in charge of coordination. We had this was permitted by the Coast Guard, by the Army Corps of Engineer, and then Chicago has their own like big city array of approvals. Everything from the mayor's office for people with disabilities to streets, and yeah. So yes, there's a lot of coordination, and this project was probably on the high side of coordination, but it's very doable. And if people are really dedicated to the mission, it becomes a lot easier because it's it's not a it's not a burden. It's part of the task to get it done.
So you stated in the information that you sent me that there were 3 physical changes made for the Riverwalk to become a civic place that successfully harnesses improved water quality and our more informal society. And those 3 things were underbridges, connections between the Riverwalk and the streets above, and the city receiving permission through the U.S. Congress to extend the Riverwalk 25 feet into the river. You've talked about this a little bit. Tell me why these 3 things in particular are so critically important.
Well, those are the final things that we found that had to be put together to make this work. Um, it was really funny when we got this commission. Um, we were challenged by it, but I wouldn't say it was a high profile commission. In fact, um, the city, in fact, one of the things she said, we could talk about that. The city had a lot of architects and planners had proposed ways to improve the city's relationship with the river. The Chicago is where it is because of the Chicago River. Um, it actually dates back to uh, Marquette and Joliet when when France controlled the very northern part of the continent and then the southern. They were looking for a route to connect uh, their holdings, and they knew about the Mississippi River, but they didn't know how and if it connected to the Great Lakes. So they sent out the expedition to figure that out. The King of France did, and what happened with Marquette and Joliet? They started in Lake Michigan, and then they dropped into the Green Bay, and they portaged to the Wisconsin River, which is a long portage, and then they took the Wisconsin River into the Mississippi. And when they got to St. Louis, the connection was made, and they knew that they had found this land route. Um, but what happened is when they talking to the indigenous people, the tribes, they told them that there was another way back that was much more efficient. And so when they came back, they went up the Illinois River, and there is a 10-mile portage from the Illinois to the Chicago River, which was much less than the portage on the Wisconsin River. And eventually, that became the canal that connects the entire ship and canal system in Chicago. So what that meant is they had found a really efficient, short way to take stuff across across continent. And Chicago was the place where you transferred from river to lake traffic. And therefore, it was an important place. This is where things were assembled. This is where places were shipped through. And so, without that expedition, without that connection, without the Chicago River, some other city would be the capital of the middle of our country, not Chicago. And but one of the things that happened is because it was so important for the early years of the city, that was the transportation system, the river, and it was highly abused. Um, we didn't know about pollution and all the things that we could do to our water supply. We knew it just didn't seem important. We didn't have the amount of information. So one of the things that kept the river from being developed all those years was that it was heavily polluted. It was dead by NEM. In fact, we were even so clever. The Chicago River it is in the Great Lakes watershed. So in its original condition, it outlet into Lake Michigan. Uh, but as Chicago grew, that was problematic because that meant all this stuff that they were dumping in the river, they were then putting in Lake Michigan, and that was the source of drinking water for the city of Chicago. So Chicago in 1900, very cleverly, this is at the time was a wonder of the world, reversed the flow of the river by adding a series of locks to that canal that I just described. And basically, at the mouth of the river, what that did is it allowed us to reverse the flow of the river, send all our sewage to St. Louis. It was very clever of the city. And so the river was in terrible shape. So St. Louis did sue Chicago, and eventually, the EPA, which is now being dismantled, really good thing to think about, did insist on the improvement of water. I mean, water probably will be the resource of the future that is the most coveted. Anyway, um, what kept the so architects, Burnham had a plan for the river. Even though there were all these great plans, I think that a lot of them were not acted upon because the river was in such despicable shape. I don't think a lot of people, um, when I was a kid growing up, I remember I had this one job where I was working in a building right along the river, and there were terrible things happening in the river. What they pulled out of the river was like really bad stuff. Anyway, um, one of the reasons why our project succeeded is because the river was getting cleaner. And so that meant that, I mean, you can't make a beautiful river walk on a stinky river. So I think when I was talking about the water quality, why that was so important, that's why that's an essential piece. The other piece is just make it function. They make the city function. So I firmly believe that I hate it when people say, well, it's this style or is it beautiful? Because to me, the architecture is not about that. We don't in my studio, we don't start that way at all. It needs to be buildable. It needs to be relatable. It needs to be authentic. It needs to be functional. It has to be maintainable. And if it does all those things, it will be beautiful.
I
If you
love
don't do
that.
any of those, if you don't do those well, then it won't be. But if you do, that's it. And so it's really I know it's easier for people in general to talk about architecture as what it looks like or style, but that's not its essence at all, and that's not what makes it good.
I'm gonna like print that quote out and frame it and take it everywhere I go because I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like we learn as design professionals, regardless of our role in the industry. I feel like we learn the most from the challenges we face. I mean, the easy things are easy, right? What would you say was the most challenging to navigate on this project, and what did you do to be successful?
I'm not sure. On some projects, I probably could name one thing that was the hardest. I don't know that there was one thing on the Riverwalk. It's so complicated. It's so complex. It touches so many of just different parts of Chicago and different parts of Chicagoans' lives. I'm not sure I'd identify one as the most complicated or the hardest. Things that were complicated, money always is a complication. We didn't know that we'd be able to finish the last part of the plan. And we had the original money from the TIF, but I didn't know that project would go ahead beyond that, which meant that we just did one little park on the river at that point. Um, Coordinating public opinion about it was always hard. Um, in a way, the Riverwalk was easier than some because it didn't affect any one person's property or any one neighborhood's image of themselves. But getting input consensus was difficult because there's so many groups. The engagement we did for the Riverwalk, often when we do public projects, we like to do formal engagement, public engagement, and we'll design it for that project. Uh, we need to talk to like I was talking about Oklahoma City. That's the first time we designed a really um, intense engagement. The reason we did it was because it was it was GSA's plan to move back the agencies that were in the building the day it was bombed, except for law enforcement. Law enforcement was never going to go back. And quite honestly, the people who were in the building didn't want to move back to that neighborhood. It was not a good memory for them. And so the first thing that happened when we got the commission was that nobody wanted to move into the building we were designing. And so GSA, Ed Feiner in particular, um, commissioned us to talk to the people. And we learned how, it took us a while to learn how to talk to people because it's hard to elicit the right information. But often it's like that where you're talking to a community. We're talking to the people who had been in the building, and then we're talking to people of Oklahoma City, and we were talking to the Oklahoma City official people. So it was easy to design that one, relatively speaking. This one was hard because you're talking to the city of Chicago, and there's no neighborhood, there's nothing. So in the end, we had a lot of input from individual groups. I told you that the Wabash Plaza was a veterans memorial. Then we had a really active group representing the veterans who helped us with that part of the park. The Friends of the Chicago River gave us very valuable input. We even met with a club of people who commuted to downtown Chicago by kayak. So in this case, our engagements were with interest groups rather than neighborhoods. So it was really fascinating. So that was a challenge. The actual construction was a challenge. Um, and we don't do that very often. This is pretty funny. The river is it's between 10 and 20 feet deep, and it has nothing in it except muck because there's really no natural environment. And we pulled out all kinds of things from the muck. But one of the things, like for example, a challenge about that is even though we backfilled um, our our uh, our construction, it's backfilled with gravel, just like you'd see a typical backfill. But because there is so much muck at the bottom of the river, our engineers said that we couldn't predict settlement accurately. So actually all the Riverwalk is all structure. So at the edge of our new wall to back to the edge of the river is a structured slab. And then we planted on top of that. So I mean, it was very complicated from a construction viewpoint too. The other interesting fact about the Riverwalk is about only about half of it is architectural or landscape finish. The rest of it is all structural, basically infrastructure. Half of the dollars were spent on that.
That doesn't surprise me. You say that public spaces work best as, quote, loss leaders. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, at the Riverwalk, since we're talking about it, is a good example. Uh, if you look at the development along the Chicago River before and after the Riverwalk, the spaces that had been empty for years and years and years, spaces along the river, have been constructed since then. And the amount that the city invested in the Riverwalk, it's a minor, minor investment compared to the investment people made in the city because in part, I mean, yeah, yes, Chicago's a great place. People didn't come there just because of the Riverwalk, but it became a very desirable location for investment. And so that's one way. I mean, just like that really completely transactional. That's one way to cities to think about public space. But the second is the vitality that is added to the downtown. Uh, it's made people love downtown Chicago, and that is priceless. I mean, that is really a loss leader. You could spend almost any amount of money to get that.
So let's talk about the park for a few minutes. Tell me about this park.
The park, interestingly, is at the very end of the Riverwalk. It's not connected
Perfect.
directly to our blocks, but there's another section, the East Riverwalk, and it is on a little spit of land that the city has owned for a long time, um, and it actually has been slated to be a park for a very long time. John Baptiste Pont DuSable was the first non-Indigenous person to live permanently in the city or in the place of Chicago. It wasn't the city of Chicago, that was the place of Chicago. Uh, and this little piece of land was dedicated as a park that would memorialize him by Harold Washington in 1985. That's how long ago it
Wow.
was. Yeah, and so, the city finally found a way to finance it, and, so we're building it now. But, it's small, it's about 2 acres, and, it's a great site because it's where the river and the lake join, so you can see Lake Michigan and you can see the river. And DuSable, um, he arrived in Chicago or around, I can't remember, it was around 1780, and he was a trader. He's, uh he was born on the island of Haiti, Saint Dominguez then, and he was the son of a Frenchman and an enslaved African woman. So he was black man, and he had done a lot of trading in the upper Midwest. He married a Potawatomi, and the Potawatomi were the tribe of that particular confederation. There was a confederation of Indians that had occupied the area that Chicago is now for almost a millennia, for 1,000 years. They had a confederation of 3 tribes: the Odawa, the Potawatomi, and the Ojibwe, and they called themselves. Well, this is argued. Some say they called themselves, but in popular history, they're known as the Council of the Three Fires. In any case, he arrived there, and people say a lot of it was because he had, he had a Potawatomi wife who could translate for him and assisted his business. He established a trading post on the bank of the Chicago River at the lake, and so he was very successful. He only stayed about 10 years. He sold his stuff then to a white guy, um, but that was the spark, Chicago's manufacturing trading spark. Uh, so this park will be dedicated to John Baptiste Pont de Sable, and it's been interesting. This one we have a very active engagement. We have very active groups of people. We have a steering committee that consists of some really fascinating people with fascinating backgrounds. For one thing, two different Potawatomi bands are talking to us, uh, and they don't agree with each other. And it's been, I have to say, I'm still learning to appreciate the history, um, and what it takes to represent those people. Um, we have a group of of um, Black Americans. Yeah, w- After DuSable left Chicago, people forgot about him really fast. And for the 1933 Century of Progress, the city decided they wanted to celebrate the founder, and they didn't include DuSable among the founders. And so there was an African American group that started to work then to have DuSable recognized. And in some ways, the group I'm working with is the the extension of that same group. So this has been an objective of people in Chicago's African American communities for a long time to recognize DuSable. Um, and so we've had a really long history of people who have been working on this. We're there with Harold Washington when he dedicated the park in '85, and balancing their ideas about what this should be has been it's been hard, but it's also been really rewarding. The park will be contemplative. Um, we are actively interpreting DuSable's life and history, so it'll be educational, and it's really great because it's also at the end of the Riverwalk. So for me, it has a personal significance too.
Tell me about that pavilion area, because
Well,
I tried to figure that out.
oh,
The arches over the walkway and what's going on there?
well, I told you that people had forgotten DuSable pretty much, and the other thing is when they finally did recognize him, they built a little log cabin, and they said that represented his trading post on banks of the Chicago River. And actually, when DuSable left Chicago, he sold his estate to John Kinsey, who was also a very early Chicagoan. And he sold it for everything. It was something like 6,000 pounds or whatever they used. I think it was pounds. And in today's terms, that would be worth between million and a half and $2 million. So this guy was very successful. And I mean, he left Chicago a rich man. And the bill of sale is in a museum in Detroit. It's in French. Pretty cool. And it lists everything that he sold to Kinsey. And it also lists the size of his house. His house was not any little cabin. It was 22 feet wide and 40 feet long. That was the house. And he had 5 other buildings on the site besides that. So, we wanted to represent that to sort of like write the memory, like this guy was rich. And so our little pavilion, we didn't want to build a replica of his house because we have no accurate, we don't have any drawings or representations that were made while it was there. We have some pictures that were done maybe like 50 to 100 years after the building was in that state. So we didn't want to do that, but we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could represent how rich this guy was in his estate, sort of break this wrong idea. And so the arches, the space they enclose is 22 by 40. That is the size of his house. And the interpretation will let you understand that. And then what we did is um, we're laser cutting the deed, what he sold, into those panels. So you'll be able
That's what
and
it is.
that you'll
Okay.
be able to stand in the footprint of his house and read what he sold his estate.
I was reading some of those words in the renderings, and I'm like,
Yeah, cows, pigs.
I don't get it, so I have to ask that question.
Yeah.
That's I love that. What a
We're not through with the
creative
design.
way.
Yeah, we're not through with the design yet, but, one of the ideas we're working on is, uh in fact, this is one of the things that the Potawatomi have, volunteered to do for us. We're thinking it would be wonderful. We have, I think we have 5 panels altogether. It'd be wonderful if one was in French, one was in English, one was in Creole, which was the French that was spoken in, the Upper Midwest, and one would be in Potawatomi.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see it. I get to Chicago every once in a blue moon. I haven't been there in a number of years, but I may have to make a special visit just to check it out.
Well, we wanna make history interesting by making it remarkable, so that would do that. So our, that's been our objective for this. The park includes we can't duplicate the exact species of plants, but we want to, approximate the feeling in the atmosphere. So we have, wetlands, the edge of Lake Michigan has always been, very indeterminate. It's a glacier lake, so it's not, a steep shoreline. It's this gentle sweep out, and so the edge has always been swampy. Um, so we have a little wetlands that you'll be able to wander through. You'll see, some of the plant types, not the actual, historical plants, and, so we've been trying to just subtly recall. I don't think history should slap you in the face. This is not going to be like a history lesson, but, we wanted to, make people intrigue them,
Well,
sort
you
of
did that to me just with the renderings.
Oh,
I
good.
mean, as I was working on some of the questions I wanted to ask, I was like,
And,
I
there's always ideas that die too, because either, so people ask all the time, they say, "Oh, isn't this beautiful? Did you get to do everything you wanted?" Never.
yeah.
And so some of the ideas that have died on DuSable Park already. We have a lot of fill on the site that was left on by a previous owner. And so we've organized the fill into 3 hills, which not specifically, but loosely recall the Council of the 3 Fires. Um, and originally we had this crazy, crazy idea that I still wish we could have done because we did a lot of research on it, where we wanted to put a laser beam on top of each hill to represent one of the tribes, the 3 Fires. But we had a big pushback from the park district, who is our client, because they're worried about light pollution and birds. But we did a lot of research to figure out how that wouldn't happen. But some things are removable. So you call that a compromise, and you make that beautiful too.
Absolutely. Although I think it's a really cool idea.
Oh, because then you could have seen it from all over the city.
So I want to make sure I get this question in before we get to our two closing questions. In 2023, and I happened to be there, although I wasn't at the ceremony. In 2023, you were the first listeners, hear that, first in 2023, living woman to individually accept the AIA Gold Medal. For those that don't know, the Gold Medal honors an individual whose significant body of work has had a lasting influence on the theory and practice of architecture and is the architecture profession's highest honor. What kind of slapped me on the face on that one is that it took all the way to 2023 for that to happen. Tell me, what did that, you're a trailblazer, what did that honor mean to you?
Oh, well, I still am not quite sure. It's a huge honor. I mean, it's not something I could have ever imagined for myself when I was talking to my guidance counselor in high school saying, Sister Catherine Patrick, I want to be an architect. It's so funny because she didn't tell me, oh, Carol, don't do that. You should be an interior designer instead. And this is 1965, 66. So she had every right to tell me to be an interior designer. So, I never imagined this. I was just hoping to make it to architect. But when I think about it, well, first of all, I have to explain. It wasn't a surprise in a way because, like a lot of these awards, it's quite they're very thorough, and so we had to submit a extensive portfolio, and we competed with other groups who were also nominated, other people. It is an individual award for the largest part. About 3 or 4 years now, maybe it's longer than that now. Robert Venturi, when they gave it to Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. That was the first time they gave it to a partnership. There's still a lot of controversy about that at AIA because AIA gives an award for partners, which is called the Firm Award. And this was always an individual award. But the argument is that sometimes the inspiration that makes that significant impact on our is a joint effort. So anyway, I'm not going to discuss that one. Uh, in any case, so it's not overnight. But it still was like, oh my God, this is like beyond my wildest dreams. Um, that being said, I was glad about it for a few reasons. One is my practice is not typical architect practice. We do infrastructure, you know. I have no museums or beautiful houses in my portfolio. I'd like maybe to have some, but I don't. And it hasn't been my concentration. And that's really, we talked about this earlier. That's what a lot of people think architecture is. So just by my winning the gold medal, people had to look at other things that are architecture and affect their lives in a big way. So that was superb. The other thing that was really interesting to me is the last person to win the gold medal from Chicago was Mies van der Rohe
Oh,
in
really?
1962. And so, I mean, and Chicago is a birthplace of modern architecture. We're still a huge exporter of architecture. How does that happen? There have been so many great architects in Chicago that have not won the gold medal. Uh, Helmut Jahn, Harry Weiss. I mean, there's just all these names. You say, what happened here? So that was great. I mean, I Marlon Blackwell, who won it before me, said he won it. He was in flyover country. We're in land and keep going country, I guess. I don't know, but it was such an oversight. So that was great. Okay. Put Chicago back where it really belongs. And, but finally, it's really hard. And I said this when I accepted it. I don't think any architect wants to be known as a woman architect. But the truth of the matter is that, uh, yeah, it, there were 70 some gold medalists before a woman earned it in practice by herself like everybody else. Well, they gave it to Julia Morgan, but she had been dead for like 70 or 80 years after she got it. And she really was a trailblazer more than I am. I think I'm just like this. I'm just like the forward edge. In fact, it's already happened. Deborah Burke won it this year, and it's just the time has come, and the reward is it enables a lot of women to do better work and to get the rewards that they're due. Architecture is weird. I mean, to get you're working basically with millions of dollars of other people's money. It's not like painting. I can make a painting and then ask people, "Do you like it?" Or this is what I'm thinking about. It's not that it's less significant to paint. I could do that by myself. Some maybe big scale art you can't, but okay. Anyway, so you have to have opportunity to do that. And you get opportunity traditionally by your portfolio. But it's a chicken and an egg story. If people won't hire a woman architect because they've never seen one before, they don't have a portfolio, so they have no opportunity. And so I hope in a way that it breaks down that because that's important. I think that we need all the good thinkers that we can, including the 50% that happen to be women.
I couldn't. My first firm that I worked in, there was not a female architect. I'm a spec writer. I'm not an architect, but there was not a female architect in our office for the first 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
And I started at that first firm in the late 80s.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a long time before we had a woman in our office. There were not a lot of people as I was coming up through the business
Yeah.
to look up to that could relate to my journey. And while I'm not by any means comparing this to the AIA Gold Medal, when I got fellowship in CSI a few years back, I was one of only, I think it was 8 or 9% of women in CSI that received fellowship,
Yeah.
or only 8 or 9% of all fellows since the 1950s in CSI have been women. I don't want to be known as I want to be known as a badass spec writer who wants to help move the industry and mentor young people and make a difference in whether male or female. But the fact of the matter is, while we've come a long way,
Yeah.
the equal seats at the table are not yet there.
I can't agree more. So I said that, and I mean it. I don't want to be known as a woman architect. That's not what I do well. I'm an architect, and
Right.
that's what I do well. On the other hand, things need to change. They still need to change. My class at the University of Illinois, we graduated 100. There were 3 women. And when I started working, my first job was at Halliburton Root. There was one other woman architect.
I bet that was a
Who
novelty.
she was great. She was she was yeah, she was very unusual. She's a pistol.
So before we do our 2 closing questions that I do for every episode, tell me what Ross Barney is working on now that we can look forward to. This is your chance to celebrate your firm a little bit and tell us what's coming that you can tell
You
us
know,
about.
I think, one thing that people, may not understand about us is we work on all kinds of stuff. For us, it's the problem, solving the problem. And, uh, we right now we're working on I hope it continues, it should be interesting. Uh, for example, we, just completed or we're in the final stages of a project for the Forestry Service. They came to us we had done one master plan for them, and they liked it. We thought, well, Um, they came to us because they had a mandate from Congress to grow more trees. In a way, it's a little bit in recognition of environmental problems. Our forests have been burning, and the National Forest Service operates nurseries where they grow trees to place in national forests. And they weren't meeting their tree growing goals, and so they hired us based on our previous work with them, to help them figure out to master plan, figure out how to grow more trees. So we spent the last 2 years looking at they operate 7 nurseries, nationwide, and looking at improvements that they can make to their systems. Everything from system-wide improvements to individual site improvements. And so we just turned that in that master plan, and, hopefully they'll go ahead. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Right now, things are very uncertain in this time that you and I are talking. Who
Yeah.
knows? Next week, maybe it'll all be over. Um, we're working on we have, developed a huge interest and, expertise in doing lab buildings, which you go, like, why is a design studio doing labs? Because they're so challenging, and there's so much that can be beautiful about them. We just finished a lab for, NASA, that for doing research in deep space communications. So, we're extraordinarily diverse. I'd say, "Look out, we might land anywhere."
So, our two closing questions. In your oral history, you said that the opportunities to do the work you wanted to do were not available, so you started your own firm. I see young architects, maybe more than ever, attempting a similar journey these days. I know at a lot younger age than I've seen people throughout the course of my career branch out. What wisdom would you share with those young architects looking to go out into the world and start their own thing, go out on their own? What wisdom could you share?
Oh, wow.
I know that could be a
Yeah,
days long conversation.
that's a interesting question. Actually, I didn't the answer what that you, found is true. I did do that. But the actual, situation I was in was, I lost my job. I was in a office politics battle with, a thing about it, I didn't even know the battle was happening. It turned out it was, and I lost, and so I didn't have a job. So I had no opportunity at all. Um, so I will start out by saying, I don't think you need to start your own firm, okay? Unless that's one of the things that you think will give you great fulfillment, it's really hard, and it's painful even. But, it is a way to, be dependent on yourself to bring in the work and to, you have more control over your life. But what I think is more important that and I tell my students this all the time is, we have a profession that sort of glorifies designers, and, I've said this before, it's teamwork. You need to do and this includes starting a firm, you need to do what makes you happy. And, because it's all part of the same process, it's all part and nobody does it alone. So, for example, you said if you love writing specs, you need to find a job that lets you do that. I mean, it can be progressively more responsible. You need to find the job that takes advantage of your talents, but really you should wanna stay there rather than go home at night. That's what you're looking for ideally. And that maybe, for a lot of people, it is starting a firm, but it doesn't have to be. So keep that in front of you. Also, if you love construction technology, if you love detailing, those can bring people great joy, and they're essential to what we do. And it's silly to think it's one end. It's only one thing that makes architecture, because that's not true.
I love that that was your answer because one of the things that I've noticed in our profession over the years is that designers are held at a different level. It's I mean, spec writers have historically. I don't happen to be an architect, but a lot of the spec writers out there historically have been. That's changing these days. Um, but historically, spec writers have been kind of the redheaded stepchild in a firm. They were the architects who couldn't design, so they write specs. Or
I think that, but that's a myth.
I
Design involved all these pieces. I just can't. Now you can have great designs, but if you can't describe them properly, if you can't detail them properly,
when I
I
do
think,
think that's changing these days. I
yeah,
don't think that attitude is the same as it was
yeah,
in the
I
past.
do too. I think yeah, we spend a lot of time researching in detail. That's our particular. Um, I think that I want to put this the right way. Maybe I'll just come back to that. I think that designers, the reason that there's they're the storytellers. They're the ones who have to tell the story of the project. But you and I know that there are lots of people who are contributing to that story, to honing it down till it's the essence of the need, which is really the challenge of architecture. I think the reason designers get there is because they tell the story. But that's important because I think one of the things that's probably the most valuable skill that architects don't always develop is the ability to tell their stories.
So, final question. Everybody on the podcast gets this question. I hope we all hope to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place. Personal or professional, what do you hope your impact will be?
I think for me, it's making us live together better, more comfortably, um, more profitably, more happily. And I think I can do that, hopefully, through some of my work, spaces that I make. But I think I also can. I The reason I teach and the reason that one of the reasons why I'm proud of the gold medal is I can do a few things by myself. I mean, if I'm done and I have several hundred commissions, that's only several hundred commissions. But if I can think collaboratively with other people and influence their thinking, I can get a whole lot more done. So that would be it. I want to be a contributing member of my community.
Carol, this has been an absolute pleasure and honor to have you here on the show today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to chat with me. I hope you'll come back and tell us more as you move down this journey. You do such an interesting variety of things. I'm thinking we could probably line up 20 interviews. But thank you again. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It was very interesting. I enjoyed it.